This is Center Stage, putting your firm in the spotlight by highlighting business owners and other industry experts to help take your firm to the next level. Hey everyone, and welcome to Center Stage. I'm your host, John Henson, and this week I'm calling out a lot of you business owners for something that many of you have probably been guilty of in the past, and maybe you didn't even realize it. Despite how many people throughout your life have told you how amazing and how brilliant you are, the fact of the matter is that you do not know everything. You are an expert in the thing that you get paid to do, but we've talked about it a lot before. You likely didn't go to school to learn how to market your business. You didn't go to school to be a bookkeeper or some sort of financial administrator, a receptionist, front desk, anything like that. You went to school to be a lawyer or a financial advisor or something like that. And that's where your expertise lies. And so wanted to just have an episode this week that really illuminates just how important it is to be aware of that and to be aware of your strengths and to sort of, allow yourself to, I don't know if concede is the right word. And we can get into that here with our guest, but, to be open to expert opinions and direction when it's just something that you're not, in a day-to-day basis. So my guest this week, Rusty Gaillard, he is here to help us see that, talk about it, and just how that lack of awareness can really hinder the growth of your firm. So Rusty, thank you for joining us.
Oh, John, it's a pleasure to be here. And I love the intro. I felt like you were describing me, sadly.
Well, so let's get into it. I mean, like, what is your story? How did you get to be in this position? Why did that resonate with you so much?
Well, I'll say first, the reason it resonated with me so much is, I was married, divorced, and I'm married again. And both of my spouses used to comment on like, why don't you ever learn from other people? It's like, you have to go make the mistake yourself. And that's been a part of my history. It's like, I like to do things myself. I like that personal experience of doing things.
Yeah.
Even though there's people around me saying, yeah, that works and that doesn't work. I still like to do it myself. And, but this is one of the things I'll say about that is like, as long as I claim that for myself, that I'm a have to learn by doing kind of person, then I will always be a have to learn by doing kind of person because I'm claiming it. That's who I am. Yeah. And I'm not leaving any room for another way of doing things.
Yeah. Well, and to that point, I mean, I'm all for, learning and doing things yourself. I mean, for the people who may not want to work with us as a marketing company, we have all kinds of resources that allow them to do their marketing themselves. But I think there's still that fundamental difference of you just, throwing things at the wall to see whatever sticks versus, leaning on people who have been there and done that. And you can still do it yourself, but you're more informed in how you go about doing it.
Absolutely. And part of this ties back to kind of how you see yourself. And so you asked a little bit about my background. I mean, growing up, I was always a high achiever in school, A student, did really well, went to great schools. I went to Princeton, went to Stanford for business school. So big name schools, and worked at Apple for 14 years. I was the director of worldwide finance, leading our global sales forecast for Apple. So I had kind of big names on my resume, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that became a part of how I see myself, right? I see myself as smart, as successful, as disciplined, as hardworking, as getting the right answer. I'm always wanting to be the best. I was always aiming for the best. And those are all really great traits. And at some point they can limit you. And that's what I've come to appreciate.
Yeah. So, with our audience specifically, most of them are lawyers. We've got, a lot of financial advisors, CPAs, all that people, all those people, most of them, I think, grew up, like you, making really good grades, probably being, extolled by family and teachers and all that. Just, man, you're really smart. You're really going to do something with your life. And, not saying that those people aren't humble about it, because you can still be humble about that, but it still gets into your head like, okay, these are the expectations. These are how people see me, must be true. Mm-hmm. And, they now get into this profession where people see them as being this really smart person, this revered person, this place of authority. But, what have you seen in your career where people get to that position? I mean, you can even probably speak on this. You did a little bit there in your intro. Like, what have you seen happen to people who kind of get in this and don't really move out of it?
Yeah, and I just want to add one other piece to this is, not only are they the people, your listeners, they're revered
Mhm.
by their clients, right? Because their
Yes.
clients hire them for their expertise. But
Yes.
also, everyone listening, you've invested in your expertise, right? You've invested in yourself for good schooling, for good education, for training, all of that, the time
Yeah.
and energy you've put into it. So it really becomes this golden egg, if you will. Like,
Yeah.
all these people celebrate me for it. I've put a lot of time and energy into it. And man, the last thing I want to do is break or lose my golden egg.
Yeah.
And the golden egg really is about what you described, right? Being seen as smart, being successful, and also delivering the best. And part of that can also be doing it yourself. But the problem with this and the way it starts to fall apart is that often what happens is because of that, you do things the same way you've always done them. Well, this has
Right.
always worked for me in the past, so I'm going to keep doing it this way. We all know that's not a recipe for growth and learning and success in life, in the big
Yeah.
picture. If we can pull ourselves out of that picture, we can see if you hear someone else describe that, you're like, that doesn't make any sense. And yet when you observe your own life, you can find yourself repeating the same things over and over again and not getting the kind of success you want. And that's where this becomes a problem.
Yeah. And I've talked with some other people on the show about this. I think probably 20, 30, 40 years ago, just kind of the way that people were brought up, it was always, understand what your strengths are, but then work to make the areas where you're weaker and build those up as well. So you're more of a well-rounded individual. Maybe you're an 8 or a 9 with your legal knowledge, but maybe you're a 3 or a 4 with your marketing knowledge. So the conventional thought was, all right, we'll focus on your marketing knowledge, bring that up to a 6 or a 7, because you're in a good place with your legal knowledge. And now I think what we're seeing, and where people are kind of getting the better results, is like, hey, no, take your legal knowledge and take it as close to a 10 as you can, and then lean on people who maybe are at a 10 with their marketing knowledge,
Mhm.
and use that to your advantage.
Yeah, there's definitely something here about being true to yourself,
Yeah.
and that I think fundamentally is what I believe is most important, and that can
Yeah.
be different for different people. Like for some people, they say, "Hey, I am just going to go to a 10 in my legal knowledge, and I'm going to go leverage someone else who's a 10 in marketing." Like that
Yeah.
may be true to you, but other people may be the kind of people that say, "Well, I actually love learning about something new, and I'm challenged and stimulated by that, and so I'm going to be okay investing and growing my marketing knowledge."
Yeah.
But so I want to just share a little bit, just a brief story about a client that I worked with. I'll call him
Yeah.
Edward. He worked in a corporate environment, so a little bit different from most of the listeners here. But
Yeah.
you'll recognize the similar theme here because in this corporate environment, whenever he fundamentally was a very creative person, he was a kind of nonlinear thinker, and so he had these ideas. He had ways of thinking about problems that showed up that people just found really stimulating and interesting and helpful. And so when they were trying to think through a problem, they would often want to pull him in because he thought so differently. But whenever he showed up in a meeting with executives, he thought he had to be executive like. So he got all
Mhm.
buttoned up, he got formal. He's like, well, I got to, show up as an executive. So as a listener, can you put yourself and can you relate to this situation, right? You're hired as a lawyer, you're hired as a financial advisor, and you come in for your first meeting. Well, you probably are like, well, I have to be lawyerly, like I have to be financial, I've got to be professional and buttoned up. And what this person did is learn to be more true to himself. And so as a part in these executive meetings, he started bringing more of that nonlinear thinking, those off the wall kind of questions, that different way of thinking about problems.
Yeah.
And it was very well received to the point that he started getting more and more interest across the company because he built a brand for himself. He built a reputation as being who he really is: creative,
Yeah.
nonlinear, inspirational, and bringing different perspectives. And people reached out to him more and more because of it. So I just share that just very briefly as like, we can think we need to be a certain way. And especially
Yeah.
if you've invested a lot in your education, back to the idea of the golden egg, right? Well,
Yeah.
people see me as this successful person. I can't mess that up. And so
Yeah.
you don't really show up as yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I even resonate with that story because that's exactly what I've done. And our VP here, challenges us to come up with like a word of the year that would, is really going to define,
Yeah.
our 2023. And I chose the word authentic
Hmm.
because I've talked about this on some other episodes. I recently got diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. The term masking is a big part of that, and to your point, like it's a little bit of what that is like I'm in these meetings with our leadership team. I feel like I have to be a certain way and I have to contribute in a
Hmm.
certain way, and a lot of people say like fake it till you make it. Well, you made it, so now like this is you, and be yourself. People are going to see your authentic self, and that's why you're there.
Yeah. Well, and I just, since you're talking about that, I think it's also important, when oftentimes when we think of authenticity, right, it challenges us to say like, who am I? Who am I really?
Mhm.
And oftentimes when we're thinking about that question, it's backward looking. It's who
Right.
have I been, right? What
Right.
have I been good at? And how do I bring more of that forward? As opposed to a forward-looking question of authenticity. And so there's actually a professor, Hermania Ibarra, who talks about this. There's a TED talk about it called the authenticity paradox. And it really gets to this crux of this issue is, are you authentic backward looking? This is who I have
Mhm.
been. Or are you
Yeah.
authentic to who you are becoming? Because there's always some degree of discomfort and growth and what we call now imposter syndrome as you're
Yes.
growing into something new. But that's just part of the process. You can still be authentic to that. And I think that's this example I gave about the guy who's this creative nonlinear thinker.
Yeah.
Well, if he was going to say, I want to be authentic, then he would show up all buttoned up and formal and executive like in these meetings, because that's how he always did it.
Yeah.
As opposed to being like, how am I growing into this and like being more and more myself in more and more situations?
Yeah.
And that's a
And
forward looking kind of authenticity.
yeah, and we're seeing so much more of that. There was almost it's this new kind of shift that I think really started culturally in the 60s, where we think broadly about it. You think about like TV and stuff, like men were always wearing suits, women were always prim and proper and dressed up, and now people like colloquially it's letting loose and all of that. People felt more comfortable being themselves, and now we're starting to see that a little bit more in the professional world. And we talk about marketing on our side of things, and the brand and the message and all that. Like people resonate with that authenticity, and they're going to be drawn to it because you're in this profession, you built this business, that passion's going to come through. And when you're being authentic about it, that's what's really going to make those connections with people and make them want to work with you.
Yeah. And I just want to go back to what you were saying earlier is like, if you think about your legal profession versus marketing, where is your passion? Like, where do you feel? And passion, I think, can also be an overused and overrated word because,
Mhm.
like, I used to ask me 10 or 15 years ago, what are you passionate about? And you should go do that as your profession. And I would get angry
Yeah.
because I didn't know how to answer that question. I don't know what I'm passionate about. And then
Yeah.
I just feel like an idiot for not knowing what I'm passionate about. So, even if you take the word passion off the table and instead just talk about energized or excited, if you're not energized and excited about doing marketing, you probably shouldn't be doing marketing
Right.
because that's going to come through. We all have this experience, right? And especially the listeners here who sit across the table, either literally or figuratively, from clients all the time. When your client has a bad day. When your client's nervous about something, right? You can
Yeah.
sense that in them.
Yeah.
Well, that way, the way you sense that in others sense that in you when you're doing something that you're not excited about. So if you're
Yeah.
doing marketing because you think you should be doing marketing, as opposed to having someone who loves doing marketing do it for you,
Yeah.
people are going to know that.
Yeah. So I love that we went kind of tangential to what we were talking about, because I think it's really important. It contextualizes a lot of what we're talking about. And so I want to go back,
Yeah.
because I think a lot of people right now listening are like, they connected with the story, they connected with a lot of stuff they're talking about. They're probably having that, oh no moment where it's like, yeah, I've been kind of, trying to live up to someone else's expectations, or what I think other people perceive me as. So where does someone begin when they want to start, being more authentic, or more or less not necessarily I guess what I'm trying to say, I think, is where does someone begin when they want to be more authentic and get out of that rut of always doing things the way they've always been done?
Yeah. So in my book, I talk about this a tool called the zone of possibility, and that's really a great place to start. And there's three elements to the zone of possibility. The first element is quiet. And you have to step away from all of the noise of life because, we get text messages and Slack messages and phone calls and all that kind of stuff. And it really can dominate you and your energy and your thinking. And so the quiet is about removing yourself from that. It doesn't have to be meditation. It can be. It can be going for a walk. It could just be sitting outside, but leave your device aside and give yourself some room to listen to yourself. So that's quiet. The second element is heart. And heart is specifically in contrast to head, because many of us think of like, well, what do I want to do? What's exciting to me? And we start thinking about it. We try to analyze it. And you can't analyze that any more than you can walk into a restaurant and try to analyze the nutritional value of the items on the menu in order to decide what you're going to eat. Like, you don't do that. You walk in, you're like, I feel like a salad today, or I feel like a hamburger today. You're like, what do you want? That's listening to your heart or your gut. So that's the second element of the zone of possibility. And the third element is courage, because you have to have enough courage to put aside all of the buts, because there will always be, but you can't do that, or but that might ruin your business, or but you've invested so much time and energy in this other thing and you might change direction. You have to be willing to put those aside just for long enough to listen to what ideas come to you. So it's quiet, heart, and courage. And if you can embrace those three things, give yourself a little bit of time to start this brainstorming process outside of what you've done before. Just allow yourself to think like blank slate.
Yeah. And I think a lot of, one of the things that I've seen, especially in talking about, the heart versus the head, I think people who more naturally are, and now that I think about it, I may even be wrong about this, but my original thought was people who are just constantly analytical and logical, they're always thinking in their head, they may not have as much of a problem with this. Those that think with their gut and think with their heart, or are often in conflict with their head, because there's the emotional thing they want to do, and then there's the logical thing that they want to do. And there are a lot of times where those two things conflict. The logical side of things, the analytical side of things, can present a lot of data to maybe say, hey, your heart is probably wrong in this situation, but you don't want to disappoint your heart, right? And so, one of the things, it's called analysis paralysis, and I've seen it a lot. I know that I've dealt with it myself. I know a lot of our audience deals with it. What exactly is analysis paralysis, and how do you even begin to combat that when you're trying to make a lot of big decisions?
Well, John, I think you described analysis paralysis perfectly, right? It's this internal tension. It's this internal dialogue. Like a part of you is like, I'm going to go do this. But then your head kicks in and is like, oh man, I'm not sure that's a good idea. And I'll just give you a simple example of a client I was talking to recently contemplating a job change. And, think about the economic environment that we're in right now. He's got a stable job. It pays well. He's got he knows how to do the job really well. So it's relatively easy for him. Yeah. So he's got all that. And yet he has this opportunity that's high risk. And, it's very uncertain and unstable, but he's excited about it. And it's like his heart is over there with the new job, but his head is in this place of like, but, right? Like, why would you leave this safe job? Why would you go do this thing? And, I'm giving you the example of changing job, but this can just as easily apply to hiring someone to do your marketing, or tackling, going off and working with a new set of clients that you haven't worked before. Whatever, there's so many business situations that a small business owner encounters where this exact situation comes in. There's a part of you is like, oh, that's exciting. And a part of you says, it's also irresponsible. Right. And so in those places, that's this heart versus head kind of tension. And that's really where analysis paralysis comes from. So a couple of things I would share. Number one is always to think about, is there a both and solution? Because we tend to think it's either or, right? Well, it's either I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that. And so many cases, there's a both and solution rather than either or. And so I just invite that consideration, first of all. A second thing is, and this is related, is to try an experiment. Most of us think decisions are like, oh my gosh, once I'm in and I can't ever go back. Well, don't think of it as a 100% this decision. Think of it as an experiment. Is there a way
Yeah.
that I can try this? I can dip my toe in the water. I can experiment for a day, for a week, for a
Yeah.
month, and then reflect at the end of that period. How did this go?
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's another tool.
Yeah, one of the analogies that I like to use is like, imagine you're standing in front of like three different doors. And a
Mhm.
lot of times we'll want to try to figure out, okay, well, what's behind each door? We'll try to gather as much information as we can. There are some people, and I admire them for this. There are some people who don't care how many doors there are. They're going to look at the first door they see and just run headlong into it and just whatever happens, happens. But to your point, one of the things that we've started doing, and it's almost become sort of like a mantra around here, is just try it. Just try it. Because
Yeah.
like a lot of times, especially, in the past, we would get into this, like what you were talking about is like, well, should we, this could happen. What if this happens
Mhm.
instead? And it's like, well, just try it. Like
Yeah.
the worst case scenario, you'll come out of it learning something. Maybe you'll
Yeah.
learn that something didn't work. Maybe you'll learn how to do something a little bit differently the next time. But like very few scenarios, at least as a business owner, are going to result in complete cataclysmic failure. Like to
Mhm.
your point, like you can experiment with it. And at the end of it, you'll at the very least come out learning something.
Yeah. And I think what we're circling around a bunch of different ideas that are all interrelated.
Yeah.
And so this idea of I have to get it right, this idea
Mhm.
of overthinking things versus listening
Yeah.
to your heart or your gut,
Yeah.
the idea of doing it yourself, being celebrated for your success and how smart you are. And I'm thinking about lawyers and financial advisors, like, yeah, they're intellectual. Those are very thought heavy kind of roles, and
Yeah.
appropriately so.
Right.
Um, all of these things lend towards a certain way of making decisions that tends to be risk averse, that tends to be analytical. And what happens is when you get under pressure or under stress, we always go back to what's worked in the past. And so you're going
Mhm.
to fall back on these same things that have always worked in the past. And you end up in a loop because it's like, well, I'm not exactly where I want to be, but the way you're making decisions keeps you in that same loop because you're making decisions the way you've always made them. And so this is what I call the A trap, because it starts
Yeah.
back when you were seeking A's in school. And then
Yeah.
when you start your profession, you're trying to be the A player, you're trying to be the star, and so on. And like this perpetuates itself, and you end up in this A trap where the only way to get out of it is to do something different, open a different door, see what happens, try an experiment, be willing to. And that takes courage.
Yeah. And to your point, people almost get comfortable kind of relying on their intelligence.
Mhm.
But I know you've said in the past that, good decision making requires more than just intelligence. I mean, you just mentioned courage. What else is required outside of, having grade A intelligence to
Yeah.
be a good decision maker?
Well, I really believe that the best decisions are holistic ones, which means it's not just an intellectual decision, it's a heart
Mhm.
decision, it's a gut decision. It's something that you can wholly put yourself behind. Those
Yeah.
are going to be the best decisions. And so for the people who have over-indexed on intellect, I count myself in that group too.
Yeah.
We have to learn how to listen to our heart and listen to our gut, and then have the courage to do it. And I think one of the other important elements here is we're really good at imagining all the ways something can go wrong. We
Mhm.
need to practice imagining all the ways something can go right.
Yeah.
It's
I
like
agree.
if you just, instead of saying, oh, here's all the risks of this decision, what are all the potential benefits of that decision? And what are all the risks of not taking the decision? What are the risks of inaction? Because there's risks on that side too. And if you
Yeah.
can start to see that picture more holistically, that also can help with the courage and the willingness to do the experiment, to open the door and see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, I'm super guilty of that. Like anytime we talk about like, well, some new initiative or changing something, like I immediately default to all the reasons it doesn't work. And like, look, I mean, like, admittedly, like I do then, see the positives in it, but like it's that act of first looking at the negative that causes a lot of hindrances. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, based on what you just said, is it's like, how do you get your head, your heart, and your gut to all come to a consensus? I imagine there's got to be compromise, because the more you try to have each of those three elements fight each other for superiority and beat the other two into submission, that's going to take a lot of time and you're back into analysis paralysis again. So is it compromise? Like, how do you get those three to agree with each other?
Yeah. So I think it's a great question. And I'm going to go back to something that my dad used to tell me. And when he told me this as a kid, I was always intimidated by it. But I know it's kind of intimidated by him, to be honest. But he would say, I may not always be right, but I'm always certain. And that was, I didn't really understand it at the point, but his certainty certainly was intimidating. His confidence of like, yeah, I'm going to take this decision. I'm going forward. But as I've come to think about that and reflect on it over the years, I appreciate that the certainty is not even a certainty about being right. It is part of this thing. I may not be right, but I'm certain, which is this willingness to put himself behind it. His heart, his gut, his head is like, I'm going to make the decision the best I know how in this moment, and it's going to work out. I think so many of us assume or fear that the decision won't work out. But look back on your life and say, have you really had decisions? You may have decisions that you wish you had made a different one, but did you land on your feet? Did you figure it out? Did you work it out? And almost universally, the answer is yes. And if we can remember that even if I make a decision that I find is not the right decision, I learn, I adjust, I move forward. And they say, I don't know if I'm sure you've heard this many times, that any decision is better than no decision.
Yes.
To take that decision and to move forward, because it's in the moving, it's in the implementation that you learn whether or not it was a good decision. If you're sitting there thinking and churning and trying to get alignment and all of that kind of stuff, you'll never actually get that clarity of, well, what is the right decision? The only way you learn that is by doing it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And so, just to kind of wrap things up here, I think the biggest takeaways from this are, lean into your authentic self and be certain, have that confidence and just experiment. I think those are kind of the three big things that I've gathered from this that I think are really impactful and really are going to help a lot of people.
And I would add one more, John, which is courage. I really fundamentally believe that courage underlies all of these things. It's a willingness to say, am I willing to go stretch a little bit beyond what I've done before?
Yeah, love it. So you mentioned your book a couple of times. What's the name of the book? How can people find it? And how can people get in touch with you to work with you?
The book is called Breaking the Code, Stop Looking for Answers and Start Enjoying Life. It's available on Amazon. Search up Breaking the Code Rusty, because there's a few books with that name, but I'm the only one with me as the author.
Got it. Awesome. And then how can people get in touch with you to chat with you more and learn more about what you do?
Absolutely. So the email is always great. It's rusty@rustygaillerd.com. My website's rustygaillerd.com, and I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm there frequently. So all three of those are great ways to reach me.
Awesome. Yeah. And I will have all that information in the show notes. One final question for you before we wrap up here. And that is, if you had one final piece of advice for our audience, what would it be?
My piece of advice is to be willing to stretch. And again, this goes back to courage and experimentation, but be willing to stretch outside of your realm of what you think is practical or reasonable. And so I'm not a big fan of setting goals. And the reason I don't like setting goals is because most of us set goals of like, what do I think I can achieve?
Yeah.
On the other end of that spectrum is an aspiration. And an aspiration, I'm not a big fan of either, because it tends to feel a little bit more like a dream or a wish, like, oh, wouldn't it be nice?
Right.
And so for me, setting what I put right in the middle of that is a vision, which is, maybe a little beyond what you think you can do, but it's not quite of a wish or someday wouldn't it be nice, but it's this vision of, I can actually see myself in this place and I would love it. And so I encourage, like, my piece of advice is to stretch beyond a goal. Don't get so far that you're into wish territory, but land in that place of, I'm going to stretch myself and go after a different level of success and happiness. That's in your work, in your personal life, in your relationships, in your financial resources, all of that. But set yourself a vision and then take some steps and go do it.
Yeah, I think, and that's really good, because I think, a lot of us are goal setters, but I think it's human nature. We set a goal that we feel like we can attain. And then when we get there, we kind of shift and move on to something else. There's no surpassing that goal. oftentimes it's just, okay, we hit this, now let's go do something else. And so I really like that perspective of setting something that's beyond what you would normally do. And I think that's a good place to end. There's a lot of really good information. I got challenged, so I know that a lot of our audience got challenged, and I hope that no one took offense to me calling them out or anything like that. I hope it was a nice little wake up call and some good food for thought to really think about. And so if you really did like the episode, send some feedback. You can email me at john@spotlightbranding.com. Check out Rusty's book and everything he's got going on. His information is in the show notes as well. And if you haven't yet, please leave a review and a rating for on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you're listening to the show. But that's going to do it. Rusty, thank you so much for joining us.
John, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. To learn more, go to spotlightbranding.com/center stage.